Brian Wilson, co-founder of the Beach Boys, has died, according to social media posts from his family. The Pop Tour, known for his complex studio creations, was 82. On his official Facebook and Instagram pages, his family posted, "We are heartbroken to announce that our beloved father Brian Wilson has passed away. We are at a loss for words right now. Please respect our privacy at this time as our family is grieving. We realize that we are sharing our grief with the world. Love and mercy." At the time of his death, Wilson was under a conservatorship after losing his wife of 28 years, Melinda Ledbetter, in January 2024, meaning that he had an appointed guardian managing his affairs. Ledbetter cared for Wilson, who had an unspecified neurocognitive disorder similar to dementia that rendered him unable to properly provide for his own personal needs, according to court documents. Before his marriage to Melinda in 1995, Wilson was in another conservatorship, following his declining health and decades of drug use and mental health issues. Wilson had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, and a mild bipolar disorder, and first visited a psychiatrist in 1964, according to his autobiography. In their heyday, the Beach Boys were as beloved and critically adored as the Beatles. As their name implies, the band was a soundtrack for fun in the sun, with hits like Surfin' USA, I Get Around, and Fun, Fun, Fun. But the group didn't start out as the unofficial house band for 60s suburban California. They were known at the time as the Pendletones, not the Beach Boys. That moniker was forced upon them by their first label, Candix Records. Brian famously didn't even surf, but he sold the band's surfer boy image on albums like Surfer Girl and Surfin' Safari, thanks to his astonishing ear for vocal arrangements. Bob Dylan once told Newsweek, "That ear, Jesus, he's got to will that to the Smithsonian." During a European tour in 1964, Wilson had a panic attack, the beginning of his long history with mental health issues, including auditory hallucinations. This major turning point in the band's history, which saw Wilson spending more and more time developing his studio wizardry, resulted in 1966's Pet Sounds, which is widely considered to be one of the greatest albums of all time. Featuring songs like the timeless God Only Knows, Pet Sounds was a commercial disappointment upon its release. Wilson had planned an equally ambitious follow-up, Smile, that he called a Teenage Symphony to God, but that record was canceled in 1967, and Wilson was hospitalized at a psychiatric facility the following year. The 70s were a tumultuous decade for the songwriter, marked by addiction, further estrangement from his bandmates, and a stint under the care of a controversial psychologist who later had his license revoked.
I was a druggie when I should have been a father.
Starting in 1988, Wilson went solo, including bringing his lost masterpiece Smile to live audiences with 2004's Brian Wilson Presents Smile, and touring to widespread acclaim. The Beach Boys were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988, with Wilson singled out by the Hall as one of the few undisputed geniuses in popular music. In 2004, he told the Washington Post, "I've been called a genius, but I don't know. People admire me, and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I have a purpose. I could not express how thankful I am to have that kind of thing in my life." The Beach Boys were a huge part of the soundtrack of the 60s, and even people born decades after they reached their height of popularity are bound to know their music. Despite their huge successes and enduring legacy, however, their story isn't exactly a happy one. Murry Wilson was the father of Beach Boys Brian, Dennis, and Carl, as well as their first manager, and put simply, he was a pretty horrible guy. In I Am Brian Wilson, a memoir, Brian spoke about the abuse they suffered at the hands of their father. He wrote, "My dad was violent. He was cruel. How cruel? Well, the Beach Boys songwriter and composer became deaf in one ear thanks to a blow from a lead pipe delivered to his head as a 3-year-old. As children, Brian says they were all on the receiving end of abuse. He himself was once handed a beating with a 2x4, for example, but it was only Dennis who ever fought back. The psychological abuse was there too. When they were children, Murry would pull out his glass eye and make the boy stare into the empty, gaping hole of his socket.
Did you live in fear of your father?
Yeah.
How did you get away from that?
When the Beach Boys came along.
Murry also constantly berated them during his time as their manager. He told them that they were losers, they were worthless, and they were failures. In 2010, The Guardian reported on the discovery of a letter handwritten by Murry and addressed to Brian. Dated May 8, 1965, a time when the Beach Boys were enjoying chart-topping success, it read, "It has become very apparent to me that the family cannot exist under the worrisome and trying conditions that have been going on for the last 5 or 6 years. No matter how many hit songs you write or how many hundreds of thousands of dollars you may earn, you are going to suffer remorse." Over the course of his life, Brian Wilson became more and more reclusive, even as he continued to write songs for the band. According to The Independent, his preferred place to write was at his LA home, sitting at a grand piano that he had put in a homemade sandbox so he could feel his feet in the sand. There he composed and arranged the music for 9 consecutive gold albums. In fact, he did pretty much everything except write the lyrics. Brian Wilson was also frequently partaking in amphetamines, LSD, and morphine, and topped it all off with alcohol, too. Brian became obsessed with the idea he was being bugged and would only meet with people from what he perceived as the safety of his pool. When a rash of forest fires coincided with him writing the song Fire, he started to believe his music was influencing real-world events. He started to hear voices too, and while some of them loved him, others promised to kill him. Wilson retreated even further into himself and was only 25 years old when he largely dropped out of the public eye. The entire saga of Charles Manson, his family, and the murders perpetrated by them is a strange one indeed, and it's made even more bizarre by an incident in which the story had a crossover episode with the Beach Boys. It was the summer of '68 when drummer Dennis Wilson hooked up with the Manson clan and spent a few months completely lost in drug-fueled debauchery. It all started after Dennis picked up a few hitchhiking Manson devotees and continued because of Charles Manson's own musical aspirations.
On our way back to the studio at Brian's house where we were recording, I said, well, Dennis, you really have an interesting character on your hands now.
Once Manson started showing Dennis how to play guitar, the hooks were in. They even lived together on Dennis's dime until things suddenly went sour. Dennis offered Manson the opportunity to hit the recording studio, but when the producers tried to make some changes to his music, Manson pulled out a knife. The entire episode left a lasting impact, however, as did the legendary events that took place soon after. Even though Dennis vowed to never speak of his time with Charles Manson, Mike Love mentioned the episode in his memoir Good Vibrations. He wrote, "The guilt was devastating. Dennis was shaken to the core. He carried that guilt with him for the last 14 years of his life." Pet Sounds was an iconic album, and that cover is pretty iconic too. It was shot at the San Diego Zoo, and the San Diego Tribune reports that the cover was rumored to be a direct message to their rivals, the animals. Whatever their motivation was for shooting that cover at the zoo, however, the whole thing didn't go too well. Ultimately, the Beach Boys were banned from ever setting foot in the zoo again, and there's a long list of bizarre shenanigans that went on during their visit. Names aren't named, but someone thought it was a brilliant idea to bounce a carrot off a tiger's head. Someone else tried to manhandle an antelope, and somehow they got a hold of a few puppies and baby chicks, leaving them in strategic places around the zoo. Meanwhile, the band claimed that they were the ones really suffering, with the goats that made it onto the final album cover said to be particularly awful. But those puppies probably felt differently. It was Christmas Day 1983 when, according to Rolling Stone, Dennis Wilson was turned away from the detox unit at a California hospital, with one doctor allegedly claiming he was just too much trouble to deal with. Dennis was dead 3 days later. Dennis drowned in the waters of Marina del Rey, where he'd been hanging out with friends, drinking and diving off a boat called Emerald. He had a blood alcohol content of 0.26 when he made his final dive and didn't come up again. He was 39 years old. The years leading up to that day were rough. As early as 1963, his spot at the drums was being filled by a studio drummer, but it wasn't until 1979 that Dennis was finally kicked out of the band. Prior to that, Wilson had started using heroin, and he was the abuser in a relationship with actress Karen Lamb, whom he once nearly killed with a gun. He torched a Ferrari, checked in and out of hospitals, and destroyed Christy McVie's house, all while on alcoholic, drug-fueled rages. Then there was the last straw. Dennis hooked up with his second cousin, the 16-year-old daughter of Mike Love. That went over about as well as you might expect, and restraining orders were issued between the two bandmates. After that, there were more drugs, more alcohol, and when Dennis died, the band announced they wouldn't be disbanding and only took a short break to mourn. So what about Mike Love, cousin to the brothers and lead vocalist on songs like California Girls and I Get Around? When he talked to Rock Seller in 2016, they touched on what seemed to be an apt description of his dual personality, the switchblade and the butterfly. While Love admitted that he could see how his particular sense of humor could come off as crass at times, a lot of what he's done has all been in good fun. That's what he says, at least. Given how many times he's taken Brian to court, you can see how people would be mistaken. Love told Rock Seller that his main lawsuit against Brian stemmed from a single place, his claim that he wrote a number of Beach Boys songs, including Surfin' USA and Help Me Rhonda, but was never given a songwriting credit. Love said, "I'm not taking credit for Brian's brilliant arrangements or production or anything like that, and I'm not saying I could have done it on my own. I'm saying that there was not an accurate picture of who did what when it came to the creation of these songs. That 1992 lawsuit was just one of many, and one of the main reasons he's been labeled the villain of the Beach Boys." Love feels this reputation isn't deserved and told Rolling Stone that while he laughs off all the hate most of the time, it does sometimes break him. In 1988, Kokomo shot to the top of the charts, 24 years and 4 months after the Beach Boys' first chart topper, I Get Around. There's not much these two songs have in common, and there's a pretty good reason for that. Kokomo was written for Tom Cruise's movie Cocktail, and it wasn't written by the musical genius behind most of the Beach Boys songs either. According to Entertainment Weekly, you can blame a number of different writers and musicians, including Mike Love, for Kokomo, a song that's probably stuck in your head right now. At the time, Brian was under the constant supervision of the psychotherapist Eugene Landy, and Landy forbade Brian's initial involvement with the song, although he did show up in the video.
Landy would let Brian record with us only if Landy could be the co-writer or the co-producer of the record and stuff.
It's also worth noting that there is no actual Kokomo, although one island was briefly renamed after the success of the song. Carl Wilson died in 1998, only a few months after touring with the band for their 36th annual summer tour. The official cause of death was complications from lung cancer, although he had also previously been diagnosed with brain cancer. Wilson was only 51 years old. Obituaries, historians, and those who knew him remembered him as the group's heart, and the one who grounded the rest through all the chaos. Beach Boys publicist Sandy Friedman said, "Carl was like a rock for the group. He was the steady one. He was the tiller." Mike Love agreed and told Rockseller in his interview that of all the hard times they'd been through as a band and a family, the hardest was the final tour with Carl. He said, "After his last concert with us in Atlantic City the year before he passed away, seeing Carl Wilson take a look at all of us and saying goodbye for the last time to everybody, which is basically what it was really hard to think about again." Even though their music inspired countless lifetimes of happy-go-lucky fun in the sun, the Beach Boys didn't walk an easy road. Brian Wilson and Mike Love have both talked a little about the early days of the band with the benefit of hindsight, and perhaps most tragic of all is that their memories are tinged with both respect and regret. In his 2016 interview with Rockseller, Love said Brian had been gifted with, quote, "a supercharged packet of genealogy that gave rise to his brilliance in music." And while acknowledging his rocky relationship with Dennis, he also gave credit where it was due. Love said, "He was a very powerful drummer and he had that competitive spirit." When Rolling Stone talked to Brian in 2016, he admitted that there was plenty that he missed about those days. He missed hanging with Dennis, for example. He missed Carl, too, saying, "I miss hearing him talk, the things he has to say."